Hi, this is Mr. Bledsoe, and this is a video on graphing inequalities. And I had this come up with a few of my students on an assignment in which they were given an expression, an inequality, and let's say it was this inequality that's written like this, 1 less than x, and they were given two different graphs and asked which one of the graphs matches this inequality. And so the two different graphs that they were given, one of them looks like this with the circle on the number 1 and then the arrow going off to the right like this. And the other one has this circle on the 1 and it has the arrow going off to the left. And the question is, which one of these graphs matches this inequality? And I had a number of students who said, well, since the inequality symbol is pointing to the left, then that must mean that the graph that points to the left, which is this one, that it goes with this graph. Apparently they had learned at some point that anytime you're graphing inequalities, you just make the line, the directional line, the pointed line on your graph, you just make it point in the same direction as the inequality symbol. And that's an interesting approach, except notice that for this particular inequality, notice the way that it's written. It's written so that if you were to read it left to right, it would be read 1 is less than x. But notice I could also write this exact same inequality like this. I could write it as x is greater than 1. And notice it's exactly the same inequality. That is, the relationship between the x and the 1, the right side and the left side of the inequality, is exactly the same. You would just read it slightly differently. This first one you would read 1 is less than x. The second one you would read x is greater than 1, but they both express the same relationship between x and 1. And notice that in this second one here, x is greater than 1. Well, in this one, my symbol, my inequality symbol, is pointing to the right, which if you use the same logic that some of my students are using, well, that would seem to imply that this top graph is the correct graph for this inequality. So the question is, which one is it? Well, and the answer is, it's not a good idea to just kind of blindly go with the direction that the inequality symbol is pointing in. What you want to do is ask yourself, what's the relationship between the two expressions? In this case, what's the relationship between the x and the 1? And in this case, the relationship is that x is always greater than 1. Well, if x, my variable, is always greater than 1, and by the way, typically you do see it written like this. This is kind of the standard way of seeing it written. If x is greater than 1, then that means the value of my variable, which is what I'm graphing, that variable value is always greater than 1, which means that the graph that matches this particular inequality is this top graph right here. Because this top graph is the one in which, clearly, the values represented by the graph are the ones where x is greater than 1. And this bottom graph shows the values where x is less than 1. So I hope this video has been helpful in case anybody still has a little bit of confusion about how to graph these inequality statements.